Okay, so the whole idea behind this particular section is to look at distributive property and to look at factoring what's called the greatest common factor. So, what do the two terms have in common? And so, we're basically undoing distributive property when we do greatest common factor. Okay, so, and if you hear any weird noises in the background, I am running a dryer. But so, in case you hear any like ding ding ding, that's what that is. Okay, so let's look at finding the greatest common factor. And so that's where this whole like idea of, prime factorization, you know, what the missing factors are, that's where it was really important. And I think that once you guys start to see this, you won't have to write this out every single time. Okay, but I'm going to write this out. So I'm going to write out 12. So 12, remember, is the same thing as 2 and 6, 2 and 3. 16 is the same thing as 2 and 8, 2 and 4, 2 and 2. So I'm going to rewrite this 12a squared minus or plus 16a as 2 times 2 times 3 times a times a. Okay, so that is my 12a squared. And then my 16a I'm going to write as 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times a. Okay, now the greatest common factor is what do they have in common? Okay, so there's 4 2's on one side, but only 2 2's on the left-hand side. So actually, the only thing that they have in common is they both have a pair of 2's. Okay, they don't have a 3. They don't have enough 2's. Like, both of them don't have 4 2's. But one of them has a regular A, and I have 2 A's on the other term. And so I can highlight that other A. So essentially, what I have in common is a 4A. That is my greatest common factor. Okay, what I'm left with is what's left in, that missing factor, right? We talked about those missing factors. So what I'm left with, I should do this one first, is a 3A, right? So 3A, a plus sign that was in the middle, and I'm left with a 4. So this is what we call a factored form. I factored out what they had in common, and what I'm left with is what they don't have in common. So I undid distributive property. If I were to go back through and I were to distribute here, I would have gotten a 12a squared, and I would have gotten a 16a. Okay, but I don't necessarily need you guys to check your work. But if you're worried, right, like, oh my gosh, am I doing it right? Then go ahead and use distributive property. Okay. Now I'm going to look again, and I'm like, okay, so 20, I'm going to rewrite 20. So this is 2 and 10, 2 and 5. And you won't always, again, have to do this. And if you can do this in your head by knowing what the common factors are, then by all means, don't write this stuff out. Okay, and again, your future teachers won't require that either. So I'm going to write, I have my 3 sets of parentheses now. I'll have 3 sets of parentheses. So this is 2 times 2 times 5 times x times x times y times y. That is my first term of 20x squared y. Then I have minus in the middle. My 45 is 3 times 3 times 5 x times y, because I have an x squared y. And then minus my 35x squared is 5 times 7 times x times x. Okay, so now what do all 3 have in common? That's the little bit of a weird thing, or a little bit of a catch. Okay, so I'm looking and I'm like, okay, not all of them have 2's. Actually, none of them have 2's other than the first one. The first one has a 5, the second one has a 5, and the third one has a 5, right? Now, how many x's does everybody have? Everybody's got 2 x's. So basically an x squared. And then not everybody has a y, and not everybody has a 7 or 3's. Okay, so what am I left with? So first of all, what do I factor out? So I factor out what's in common, which is a 5x squared that I highlighted in green. what am I left with is in the first term, I'm left with a 4y squared. Okay, so 4y squared. Then I'm left with a 9y. So that's a minus sign in the middle. Okay, so the minus sign stays, minus 9y. And then I'm left with a minus sign and a 7. And that is my factored form. So essentially what I had before I would ever distribute anything is my factored completely form. So whenever I say factor completely, that's what I mean. Undo distributive property. Okay? All right, so let's move on. And I think we have a few more examples here. So I'm going to, again, just to kind of get you guys, in the process of doing this, 3, 11, 11, and 11. I'm going to rewrite these, and then you might be able to be like, oh, they both have an 11 in common. You might be able to recognize that like right away, and that's okay. So go ahead and just do it. But for those of you guys that are still struggling a little bit understanding, then we won't do any shortcuts for right now. I think as you guys get practice doing this, in this section, you probably will start be able to like shortcut some things, okay? So now both terms have an 11 in there, and both of them have 2 n's, which makes an n squared. So I can factor out an 11 squared, and then what I'm left with is a 3 and an n in my first term. I'm left with a subtraction sign in between, and I'm left with an 11 in my last term. And then that is my factored form. And all I'm doing is pulling out what's in common. Every single time we talk about factoring, you're going to look to see, do I have anything in common between my terms before I do anything else? That is always step one. What is in common with all the terms? And if there's nothing in common with all the terms, and in this case, for this particular section, you can't do anything with it. In other sections, you might be able to do other operations, and you'll see later. Okay. So 14 is 2 times 7. A, B, B, C. 6 is 2 times 3. So minus 2 times 3, A, C, C. And then plus, this is 2 times 5. 2 times 5, A, C. Okay, so do they all have a 2 in common? We'll start with 2's first. Yes. That one doesn't, not everybody has a 7, not everybody has a 3, not everybody has a 5. Does everybody have an A? Yes, I have 1 A here, 1 A here. Oops, that's a 5. Just kidding. And 1 A there. Okay. Then, does everybody have a B? No. Does everybody have C? Yes, everybody has 1 C. Okay. So what I have in common is 2AC that factors out. And then what am I left with? A 7AB squared in my first term. I'm left with a subtraction 3C, so minus 3C, and then I'm left with a plus 5. And that is my factored form. Okay, hopefully you guys are starting to get the hang of this. Okay, so 20 is 2 times 10, 2 times 5, 45, 5 times 9, 3 times 3, 35 is 5 times 7. Okay, so now I have 2 times 2 times 5, A times A, B times B, plus 3 times 3 times 5, A times A, B, and then plus 5 times 7, B times B. Okay, so what do I have in common? Not everybody has a 2, not everybody has a 5. Yes, it does. Everybody has a 5. Not everybody has a 3, and not everybody has a 7. Does everybody have an A? No. Does everybody have a B? Yes, we have 1 B in all 3 terms. So I'm left with 5B on the outside. On the inside, I'm left with 4A squared B 4a squared b. And then I'm left with a plus sign. 9, because that's 3 times 3. A times a is a squared. So plus 9a squared. And then plus sign here, and a 7 and a b. All right, there's greatest common factor. And that is it for this lesson.